The morning started like any other for Walter Briggs. The sky hung heavy with gray clouds, and the breeze carried the faint scent of distant rain and dry leaves. Behind the old red brick warehouse he'd inherited from his father, everything was still, until a strange sound broke the silence. A soft thud, repetitive, muffled, like something or someone was trapped on the other side of the wall. Walter stopped in his tracks, his hands stained with grease. It wasn't loud, but there was something in the rhythm, something almost desperate. He set down the wrench on the workbench and moved slowly toward the sound, his boots echoing on the cracked concrete floor. The noise came from a section of the back wall, a part of the building he rarely gave much thought. The wall was thick, made of old bricks laid decades ago. Walter ran a hand through his graying hair. Suspicious. Probably rats, he muttered. But when he pressed his ear against the cold bricks, he didn't hear scurrying. He heard a whimper, faint, alive. Walter's heart jumped in a way it hadn't since the day he lost his wife. He grabbed a crowbar and, guided by instinct more than reason, began prying the bricks loose. One by one, he tore at the wall with growing urgency. Dust filled the air, and the dry cracking of bricks echoed like muffled gunshots. Sweat trickled down his forehead when a hole finally opened wide enough to reveal something incredible. Eyes. Big, brown, wide with fear. And then, a trembling paw pushed through the gap. It was a dog. Walter froze. The animal didn't bark, didn't growl. It just looked at him. Not with terror, but with a quiet kind of hope. As if it had been waiting for him. The old carpenter dropped to his knees, confusion etched across his face. How or why was this dog inside his wall? But there was something in those eyes that hit him deep. A memory, maybe. A feeling that this wasn't just a coincidence. "Hey, buddy, how'd you get in there?" Walter whispered, gently reaching out to touch the dog's head. The animal didn't flinch. Instead, it leaned into his hand, pressing its nose softly against his fingers. As if to say, "I knew you'd come." The thudding had stopped. Only silence remained, heavy and strange. And when Walter finally pulled away the last few bricks, he realized the dog wasn't just stuck. He had been sealed in from the inside, and there was more back there than he could yet see. Walter sat back on his heels, staring into the dark hollow where the dog had been trapped. The space behind the wall was narrow and dust-choked, barely enough for a grown man to fit an arm through. Cooper. The name slipped into his mind like it had always been there. Slowly crawled forward, his body thin, ribs showing beneath his fur. He looked up at Walter, those same soft brown eyes searching his face for safety, trust, something more. Walter swallowed hard. How long had the poor animal been in there? He reached into the hole again, this time to feel around inside. His fingers grazed broken wood, something sharp, maybe glass and something else. Fabric. Torn, brittle, and old. The more he dug, the more uneasy he felt. This wasn't just some collapsed section of the building. It looked like someone had deliberately closed this space off. But why? Walter's gut twisted. His property had been abandoned for nearly 15 years before he moved back after his retirement. What had happened here during all that time? Cooper whimpered softly and tried to walk, but stumbled. Walter immediately picked him up, ignoring the dust and grime. The dog was light, far too light, and there were faint scars along his side, barely visible through the fur. He carried Cooper into the workshop and laid him on an old wool blanket, then filled a bowl with water and a plate with leftover roast chicken from the night before. The dog ate slowly, every movement cautious, as if still unsure this wasn't some cruel trick. Walter watched in silence. He hadn't cared for anything or anyone in a long time. Since Martha died, the house had been quiet, too quiet. And now, here was this creature, pulled from the shadows of a wall like some forgotten secret. A part of him didn't want to get involved. But another part, the part still capable of feeling something, couldn't look away from those eyes. They reminded him of something, or someone. As the dog rested, Walter went back to the wall with a flashlight. He shined the beam into the narrow opening, revealing the fabric he had touched. It looked like a child's blanket, faded blue, with a stitched pattern of stars. Something cold passed through him. He reached in further, brushing away more debris. Then he stopped, etched faintly into the brick behind the fabric, barely visible beneath layers of dust, was a name. A name he hadn't spoken in 10 years. Daniel. The name burned in Walter's mind long after he stepped away from the wall. Daniel. It wasn't just a name scratched into old bricks. It was a wound reopened. His son. The boy who used to laugh while chasing fireflies in the backyard. The same boy who stormed out of the house 10 years ago and never looked back. Walter hadn't heard his voice since that night. No calls. No letters. Just silence. He had tried to bury the pain, to move on. But now, that name had clawed its way back into the light. And it was connected to this dog. Walter sat on the porch, watching the sun lower behind the trees. Cooper lay beside him, his head resting on Walter's boot, breathing slow and steady. The weight of the dog's presence was strangely comforting, as if he'd brought something with him. A message, or a warning. Walter ran a hand over his face and exhaled deeply. Could this be some coincidence? Or was fate playing one of its cruel tricks? The next morning, Walter took Cooper to the local vet clinic. Not just for a checkup, but for answers. Dr. Emily Crawford hadn't seen Walter in years, but she recognized him the moment he walked in. Her eyes narrowed when she saw the dog in his arms. "Where'd you find him?" she asked, gently inspecting Cooper's scars. "Inside a wall," Walter said flatly. "On my property." Emily looked up, startled. "In a wall? Walter, this dog's been through hell. The injuries, they're not recent. But the trauma, that doesn't fade easy." She kept looking at Cooper with a strange expression, like something about him felt familiar. "Do you know if he was chipped?" Walter asked. Emily nodded and took Cooper to the back room. A few minutes later, she returned, and her face had changed. She looked at Walter as if she were seeing a ghost. "He is chipped," she said quietly. "And you're not going to believe who registered him." Walter's chest tightened. "Who?" Emily held out the clipboard. "Daniel Briggs." Time stopped. The clinic, the light through the window, even the air in the room, everything froze. Walter stared at the paper, heart pounding. Daniel? Is Daniel? How? Why would his son's dog be trapped in his wall? Emily spoke again, gently, but her words landed like thunder. "Walter, maybe your son was trying to reach you." And then she said something else. "There's a second address on the chip. One that's been crossed out." Walter stared at the clipboard as if the words might rearrange themselves into something less impossible. But they didn't. His son's name was there, printed clearly beside a home address. One that had been crossed out with a thick, dark line. The ink had bled through the paper, like someone wanted it erased from memory. Emily leaned in. "This second address, it's in Millstone. That's almost 2 hours north." Walter hadn't been to Millstone in decades. Not since he and Daniel had gone on that fishing trip, one of the last peaceful memories before everything fell apart. What was he doing there? Walter murmured. Emily gave a slow shrug. "I don't know, but it's not listed as his current residence. It's just there, and someone wanted it hidden." Walter felt the familiar weight of guilt settle back on his shoulders. Maybe if he had picked up the phone, just once, things would have been different. Maybe Daniel wouldn't have vanished, wouldn't have needed to hide, wouldn't have left this dog behind. That night, back home, Walter couldn't sleep. Cooper lay curled at the foot of the bed, twitching in his dreams, legs moving like he was running through something, or away from it. Walter watched him, uneasy. There was something in the way the dog moved, like he was remembering. Around 3 a.m., Cooper suddenly stood, alert, ears perked. He walked to the hallway and sat in front of the door that led to the basement, still sealed shut. The same basement Walter hadn't entered in years. Walter rubbed his eyes, got up, and followed. "You want to go down there?" he asked quietly. Cooper didn't move, but his gaze stayed locked on the door. The old man hesitated before pulling the key from the hook in the kitchen and unlocking it. The door creaked open, releasing a wave of cold, stale air. Cooper took one cautious step down, then another. Walter followed slowly, flashlight in hand. The basement was just as he remembered. Boxes, tools, dust, and that strange silence that only deep, forgotten places carry. Cooper moved toward the far corner, to an old workbench draped in a mildewed tarp. He sniffed, then pawed at the base. Walter knelt, shining the light. Something was wedged beneath the bench. A metal box, rusted and sealed shut. He pried it loose. Inside, wrapped in plastic, was a stack of faded photographs and a small, sealed envelope. On the front, written in a shaky hand, were two words, "For Dad." Walter sat at the edge of the basement stairs, the metal box resting on his knees, its contents stirring a storm inside him. He held the envelope with shaking hands. "For Dad." The handwriting was unmistakable, Daniel's. Slanted, uneven, just like when he was a teenager. Walter didn't open it right away. Instead, he sifted through the stack of photographs. Most were old family snapshots he hadn't seen in years. Daniel at 8, holding a fishing rod bigger than himself. Martha smiling at a 4th of July barbecue. And one photo that made Walter freeze. It was Daniel, maybe 20 years old, standing in front of a small brick building. One that looked hauntingly similar to the workshop. In his arms was a puppy, Cooper. His coat was brighter than, his eyes just as soulful. On the back of the photo, scribbled in pen, "Millstone, 2015. Found him near the tracks. Brought him home." Walter's heart twisted. All this time, Cooper hadn't just been a stray. He was part of Daniel's life, a companion through whatever storms he had faced. With a deep breath, Walter tore open the envelope. The paper inside was yellowed and creased, as if it had been folded and refolded 100 times. The letter began simply, "Dad, I don't know if you'll ever read this, but if you do, I hope it means I was brave enough to come back." Walter swallowed hard. The words felt like echoes from a ghost. Daniel wrote about the fight they'd had, about how he'd left full of anger and pride, certain he'd never return. But life hadn't been easy. He'd ended up in Millstone, struggling to find work, battling things he never talked about. Loneliness, depression, addiction. "Cooper saved my life more than once," the letter said. "When I couldn't talk to anyone, he listened. When I wanted to give up, he kept me going." Walter blinked back tears, his hand tightening around the page. He had failed his son, not just as a father, but as a man. And now, somehow, Daniel had tried to leave a piece of himself behind. At the bottom of the letter was a final paragraph. "If Cooper made it back to you, that means he still believed in something. Maybe I did too. I'm sorry I never called. But I hope this gives you something to hold on to. I never stopped loving you." Walter folded the letter slowly, his eyes wet. Cooper had curled up beside him, head resting on his foot. And for the first time in a decade, Walter didn't feel alone. But then he noticed something else in the box. A small key taped beneath the lid, and a folded map of Millstone. The morning air was sharp when Walter packed a thermos of coffee, Cooper's blanket, and the metal box into the truck. He hadn't been to Millstone in over 2 decades, and the drive felt longer than he remembered. Not because of the distance, but because of the weight of what he might find. Cooper sat in the passenger seat, his head resting on the window, watching the trees pass. The map Daniel left was marked with a red X, near an old train depot on the outskirts of town. That's where they were headed. Millstone hadn't changed much. The diner was still on the corner. The gas station still looked like it hadn't been painted since the 80s. But the depot, it was nearly a ruin. The tracks were covered in weeds, and the building sagged under its own neglect. Walter parked the truck and stepped out slowly, holding the map in one hand, the key in the other. Cooper jumped down and immediately began sniffing the ground, tail low, ears alert. He knew this place. They approached a rusted metal door at the back of the depot, its surface scarred with time. Walter hesitated, then slipped the key into the lock. Clicked. He opened the door into darkness thick with dust and forgotten air. The beam of his flashlight cut through the shadows. Inside was a small room, more like a storage space, with crates, a mattress on the floor, and a single shelf lined with notebooks. A faint smell of dog fur and old wood lingered. Daniel had lived here. Walter moved slowly, reverently, taking it all in. On the wall above the mattress, taped photographs fluttered in the draft. Daniel with Cooper, Daniel alone. Daniel beside a small group of people who looked just as lost as he once had. It was a hidden life, a silent chapter. In one notebook, Walter found lists of job applications, pages of sketches, and entries that read like journal confessions. I thought about going home today. I dreamed of Dad. I think Cooper misses him. Cooper lay near the mattress, unmoving, as if remembering the nights he had spent there. Walter sat down beside him, not speaking. There was nothing to say. He had come looking for answers, but what he found was more powerful. A glimpse into his son's pain, and the proof that he had tried, really tried, to come back. But as Walter reached for one last notebook, something fell out from between the pages. A photograph of Daniel, standing beside a man Walter didn't recognize, wearing a police badge. Walter held the photograph between his fingers, eyes locked on the stranger beside Daniel. The man wore a police badge clipped to his belt, his expression neutral, unreadable. Daniel, in contrast, looked thinner than in the other photos, worn down but trying to smile. The image felt different from the others, more recent. There was something in Daniel's eyes, a kind of tension Walter couldn't explain. He flipped the photo over. Scribbled in black ink were just 2 letters and a date. RT March 2021. Walter sat back against the cold wall of the room, the sound of Cooper's breathing filling the silence. RT, those initials meant nothing to him, but the timing did. March 2021. That was only a year before Cooper appeared inside the wall. Something had happened. Maybe something dangerous. He scanned the notebooks again, flipping through the pages quickly now. Most of them were journal-like entries, job applications, or sketches. But one notebook, different from the rest, was filled with names. Dozens of them. Some names had check marks next to them. Others were crossed out entirely. And at the very bottom of the last page, in the smallest handwriting, was the name Walter Briggs. Next to it, a question mark. Walter's throat tightened. His son had been keeping track of people, maybe friends, maybe enemies, but to see his own name like that, uncertain, unresolved, it broke something inside him. What had Daniel been involved in? Suddenly, Cooper stood up. His ears twitched, and he looked toward the far wall of the storage room. Walter followed his gaze and noticed something strange. A panel in the wall that looked newer than the rest. He walked over, knocked on it. Hollow. With a bit of force, the panel came loose, revealing a small metal safe built into the wall. It had no dial, no digital lock, just a keyhole. Walter reached into his pocket, pulled out the same small key that had opened the depot door. Clicked. Inside the safe were a few documents, neatly folded, and a voice recorder. Walter picked it up with trembling hands. He pressed play. First just static. Then a voice came through, tired but familiar. Daniel, if you're hearing this, then maybe you finally came looking for me, Dad. And if you did, it means things didn't go the way I hoped. The voice paused. There's something you need to know. About RT. About why I couldn't come back. Walter froze. The voice continued, low and urgent. They were watching me. And Cooper knew. Walter stood frozen, the recorder still playing in his hand. Daniel's voice, once just a memory buried under years of silence, now filled the dusty room with quiet urgency. I got involved with something I shouldn't have, the recording continued. It started small, just a favor for a guy I met at the shelter. He said he could help me get back on my feet. Said he knew people. That's how I met RT. There was a pause, then a soft laugh, bitter, tired. I should have known better. Walter leaned against the wall, heart pounding. The name RT repeated in his mind like a drumbeat. Who was this man? And what had he pulled Daniel into? The recording went on. RT was a cop, or at least that's what he claimed. But he was dirty. He ran people, folks no one would miss. Drifters, addicts, people like me. We were cheap labor for things that never made the news. Warehouses, deliveries, late-night runs. I tried to get out, but by then, Cooper had seen too much. The words hit like a punch. Cooper had seen too much. As if the dog had been more than a companion. He had been a witness. They watched me, Dad. Not just at work. At home. Even here. Daniel's voice cracked. I started leaving notes, hiding things. I didn't know who to trust. And I didn't think you'd ever come. But if you're listening, it means I had to disappear. Walter sank to the floor, trying to steady his breathing. Everything he thought he knew about his son's disappearance, the silence, the absence, was unraveling. Daniel hadn't just walked away. He'd been running, hiding, surviving, and now, somehow, Cooper had made it back. Alive, as if carrying a final message. The recording continued. Cooper escaped the night everything went wrong. I made sure of it. He was supposed to run, to find someone. I don't know how, but I think he'll find his way back to you. He always knew where home was. Walter looked down at the dog lying near the mattress, eyes watching him with quiet intensity. Cooper hadn't just survived, he had remembered. And then Daniel's voice returned one last time. There's a notebook in the safe. It has names, locations. If you're brave enough, take it to someone who still cares. If not for me, then for the others. A click. The recording ended. Walter opened the envelope in the safe. Inside was a list, dozens of names, and at the top RT, underlined in red. Walter sat behind the wheel of his truck, parked outside the old depot. The list of names spread across the dashboard like a silent accusation. Dozens of them, some crossed out, others circled, many with short notes beside them. Missing since 2019, spoke to press, disappeared after last job. And at the top, underlined twice in red ink, RT. No last name, no rank, just those two letters, still burning a hole in Walter's gut. He couldn't pretend this was just about Daniel anymore. Something bigger had happened. Something darker. He looked at Cooper, curled in the passenger seat, eyes tired but alert. The dog hadn't made a sound since they left the building, as if he, too, understood what had been uncovered. Walter clutched the envelope tighter. For most of his life, he had believed in rules, in silence, in burying things that hurt too much to face. But now he realized silence had cost him everything. His son, his peace, his future. And this time, he wouldn't walk away. Back in town, Walter went to the only place he thought might still care, the local sheriff's office. Sheriff Keller was an old friend, or at least had been years ago. They hadn't spoken since Martha's funeral. Walter walked in, list in hand, heart thudding against his ribs like a warning. "I need to talk," he said. Keller looked up, surprised. "About what?" Walter hesitated, then placed the list on the desk. "About Daniel, and about a cop named RT." The sheriff's face changed instantly. Not confusion, recognition. That was enough to send a chill down Walter's spine. "Where did you get this?" Keller asked, voice low. Walter didn't answer right away. "My son left it, before he disappeared. He said this man was dirty, that others were involved, that people were being used and then erased." Keller leaned back, eyes scanning the paper. "RT isn't with the force anymore," he finally said. "Disappeared last year. Just vanished." "So did Daniel," Walter replied. "But he left behind evidence. He left Cooper. He left me this." The sheriff was quiet. Too quiet. Walter felt something shift in the room. A tension, subtle but thick, as if the walls themselves didn't want this story told. Cooper stood up suddenly, tail stiff, ears locked on the door. A sound outside, footsteps. Not just one pair, multiple. Walter looked at the sheriff. If he vanished, someone helped him disappear. And I think you know who. The footsteps outside the sheriff's office grew louder, deliberate. Walter didn't move. Neither did Cooper. Sheriff Keller stood slowly, walked to the blinds and peeked through. "You need to go," he said under his breath. "Now." Walter narrowed his eyes. "Why? Who are they?" Keller looked at him with something between guilt and fear. "People who don't want this story out. You think RT was working alone?" Walter stood, his voice steady. "I think Daniel died trying to expose them, and I'm not going to let that be for nothing." Keller reached into his desk drawer and pulled out a flash drive. "This is from Daniel. He brought it to me once. Told me to keep it safe. I didn't listen. I was scared. But you," he paused, "you've already lost more than most. And you're still standing. That means something." Walter took the drive and turned toward the door. "This ends now. For Daniel. For everyone on that list." Cooper followed, his gait strong again, as if he, too, sensed they were nearing the end. Walter didn't go home. He drove straight to the local newspaper office. A small, forgotten building where the stories that didn't make national headlines still found a voice. The editor, a tired-looking woman in her 60s, read every name on the list without saying a word. Then she looked up at him. "We'll run it, but you need to be ready. People will come after you." Walter nodded. "They already have." The story hit the next morning. "Whistleblower's dog leads father to dark secrets." It spread faster than anyone expected. Cooper's photo, Daniel's name, and the truth they uncovered reached far beyond Millstone. Families of the missing came forward. Retired officers called with pieces of the puzzle. And slowly justice started to take shape. Not fast, not clean, but real. Weeks later, Walter stood in the backyard of his home, watching Cooper chase birds like a young pup again. The sun was setting, casting a soft orange glow over the place where it all began. He held the last photograph of Daniel, smiling, holding Cooper, unaware of how little time he had left. Walter didn't cry. He didn't have to. For the first time in years, he felt like something had been made right. He looked down at Cooper. "You found your way home," he whispered. "And maybe, just maybe, so had he."